Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, it is time to take your questions, and we start off this week on Bluesky with Saeed Khan, who asks, why do you think Carney is giving Ford such latitude and visibility in the negotiations with the US, for example, including him in photo ops, as well as cabinet level meetings? I suspect that's overreading a little bit, and most of this was around Trudeau. We haven't had enough time with Carney yet to know what's going on there. Part of it is because Trudeau became very allergic to criticizing premiers, even when it was stuff that was their own fault. He really didn't like to do that because then he was called, people kept saying he was shifting the blame and that kind of stuff, even though premiers had responsibilities that they weren't living up to and so on. So that was part of it. The federal government can't really tell premiers what to do. The prime minister is not the father of the premiers. He can't send them to their room, that kind of thing. So Ford kind of does his own thing. The federal government can't do much about it. They could get on the phone with him quietly and kind of give him a what for. But again, do any of them actually listen? Probably not. So I think that's more what you're seeing. Ford was invited by Lutnick to this meeting, even though it was really a meeting with Dominic LeBlanc. Kind of was a way of shutting up Doug Ford, really, more than anything else. So that, again, is on the American side, not really the Canadian federal government side. So I suspect that's more of what was going on than any real endorsement of what Ford or any of the premiers have been doing. Next question comes from the quote-unquote Revolution Party of Canada, who asks, following yet more disproportionate results in the recent Ontario provincial election, will ending first past the post be a key issue in the upcoming federal election? It absolutely will not. Anyone who brings it up will be told, we are in the middle of an existential crisis. Why are you bringing this up? Pretty much that. Also, just another reminder, the whole disproportionate thing means that you're actually not reading the results properly, because if you aggregate all of the results into the so-called popular vote, you are actually engaging in a logical fallacy, because each riding has different numbers of candidates running, and you can't just necessarily add them all up and expect that number to mean something, because it was 100 and some separate elections happening at the same time. That's how general elections work under our system. Trying to mash everything together to come up with an overall percentage figure sounds like it's a good idea, but it doesn't actually mean anything in reality because of how disparate each riding election happens to work. Next question is from Always Vote, who asks, pretend you are a strategist / tactician / campaign director for the NDP. What are your top 3 priorities? Number 1, learn your jurisdictional responsibilities. Number 2, maybe get a credible economist. And number 3, try and find some Canadian policies and not just cribbing everything from the American Democrats, because they have very separate issues than what Canada does. And simply importing them doesn't necessarily it plays well on social media because of the gravity of which a Bernie or an AOC tends to attract followers, but half of their proposals are irrelevant in Canada, so it really doesn't mean anything. So maybe, find some Canadian policies. Alfie Maddow asks, could Canada block Twitter and Facebook during the 2025 elections? Theoretically, yes. China can do it, so theoretically we could. It would probably be unconstitutional to do so. And a whole lot of work and a whole lot of expense. And then people would usually just use a VPN and get around it anyway. So probably not worth it, in spite of the disinformation problem. There are other ways to deal with disinformation than blocking whole sites, particularly when it proliferates in other venues as well. So it would essentially be whack-a-mole. I don't see that as being a particularly helpful idea in the long run, as good as it may feel in the moment right now. Finton Hartnett asks, please explain how a vote splitting strategy will help the NDP or Greens. I don't see how that's possible. Vote splitting tends to only really work for one of the major parties, because the other large rival would essentially, it's their vote that's being split, which is the whole logic behind the Conservatives' current, I guess, amalgamation, big tent, so on, of, progressive Conservatives and Reform Conservatives, and now far right PPC, not actually Conservatives. But yeah, it's about trying to concentrate your vote, and small parties can't come out of that ahead in a vote splitting strategy. That's just not how that works. Pair of questions from Dominique Joseph. First one asks, the small temporary cabinet has a minister of government transformation, as well as public services and procurement. Any hints as to indication of what government transformation they have in mind? They haven't really said anything yet. Carney has been pretty vague on most of his policies or ideas. So that's something I guess we will need to stay tuned for. Most governments, when they come in, however, will have some notion about how they want to change things and do things differently. And will give someone a grandiose title to do that. We've seen it happen before. This may be just more of the same. And they may find out that, things work the way they do for a reason, and transforming that may actually be harder than you think. Second question is, AI is mentioned twice in the announcement of Carney's trip to Paris and London. What do we know about his interest in AI? Part of this, particularly around the safety and responsibility, I think is building on the previous AI summits that were, I believe, in Paris. So I think this is just following up on some of that, particularly because the AI legislation that Canada was developing died during prorogation. So there may be just some meeting just to kind of say, yes, we're still on board with the safety stuff. And, in the next parliament, this is something we hope to be advancing, is my guess. In terms of his interest in it, he did kind of bring it up a few times here and there during the leadership debates, but everyone brought up AI as this, basically magic wand tool for how they plan to make things better in the country. I don't know that there is a necessarily coherent proposal on the table around that. Just let's use AI. Tends to be what people keep bringing up, and we'll see if anything comes of it. All right, we are shifting over to Twitter, and a pair of questions that are both kind of on the same topic, so I'm gonna read them together. First one from Dieter McPherson, who asks, what powers does Privy Council wield during the writ period, and more specifically the tools they have or don't have during a trade war? And also on the same vein, Steve Shaw asks, how much consultation of opposition parties is required on major decisions during an election period? If consultation is required by convention, does that extend to giving veto powers to opposition parties? So Privy Council doesn't really have any powers during a writ period. It's still the minister who has those powers, because they remain the minister throughout the election period. The caretaker convention is that you don't do anything major during that period, and if something comes up, you usually work in consultation with the opposition parties. This does not give them a veto. There is no strict formula for what consultation is supposed to mean, and it does not necessarily mean your decisions will be in consensus with those opposition parties. It means that you have consulted them, before you take a decision. You are not obligated to follow their advice, however. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. It's really that the minister is still in charge, but they try and operate with restraint during that period, just because the government may change after that election. However, yeah, they are still in charge. There is no vacuum of leadership. There is no vacuum at the top, despite how some people might think or describe it. So that's really what's going on there. And again, yes, it is nice to consult with them. It is nice to take their advice. Nobody is obligated to follow it, and nobody gets a veto as a result. And the last question, also on Twitter, is from Try Gremlin, and I suspect this is a slightly trolly question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. What is it that changed your mind on the Liberal Party? You've been taking unjustified shots at the Conservatives for years until now, calling Poilievre names like Peter Pan and such. Seriously, what was it? I don't generally call names. I referred to Poilievre as Peter Pan in a column because as the boy who grew up, he has refused to be the adult in the room around getting his security clearance. That's not really name calling because it was not meant in a taunting capacity. And as for changed minds, my mind hasn't changed on anyone. I'm not cheerleading for any party. My job as a journalist is to call bullshit on everyone in the room. Doesn't matter the party. And I do that with everyone in the room. And everyone's bullshit is different. So I call their bullshit on their own specific things. People don't necessarily understand that. And they get all pissy about it. And sometimes, they like it when I'm calling out certain parties, but when their own party gets called out, they really don't like that. And that's what happens in my job. So I haven't changed my mind on anyone. You may personally think that I'm being harsher on someone at any given time. That's just a function of who has grabbed my attention at the moment or what the issue of the day is. But yeah, I'm not here to play favorites. Yeah, that's me doing my job. So if you think that I am favoring someone or that my mind has changed on someone, you probably just haven't been paying enough attention to how I do my job. And that's everything for this week. Thank you for all of your questions. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at Journo_Dale on Twitter and JournoDale no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.